We've looked at a lot of the theoretical elements of the Kimura system. We've seen that everything begins with a simple bifurcation. The moment you lock on a Kimura upon your opponent, the first question you're asking yourself is, what direction am I going to take this? Kimura has two faces. On the one hand, it's an incredibly effective method of breaking someone's arm. On the other, it's an incredibly effective method of restraining somebody's movement. And in both capacities, Kimura is incredibly valuable in your submission arsenal. We've seen that the basic rule of thumb we use here is if we can get the hand behind the back in a weak posterior position, we're going to go mostly towards submission holds. If we cannot get the hand behind the back, then from this anterior position, it makes more sense for us to switch into other submission holds or other positions. This is the basic direction of the Kimura system that I teach and use. We saw that within that general system, there are four main methods of Kimura that we use. The standard figure 4 methods, where we just use our two hands to lock up our training partner's arm. We also saw the idea of a cross Kimura, where our legs get incorporated into the Kimura attacks. We saw the idea of a hybrid Kimura, somewhere between Kimura and omoplata, where the legs replace the pushing hand on our opponent's arm, and we derive tremendous breaking power as a result. And thirdly, we looked at the idea of a hybrid between triangle and Kimura. This method locked in our opponent's head in such a way that Kimuras became incredibly effective breaking mechanisms, and I'll be coming back to this topic quite a bit more as we progress through the video. Used in this way, these four different kinds of Kimura, locked up in the overall directionality that I mentioned previously, we've got a very effective way of attacking and working with the Kimura lock. Then we added to this special subsystem of Kimura, the t-kimura position. This turns out to be of immense value because it enables an athlete in an uncontrolled scramble situation to be able to lock an opponent down just long enough and exert just enough control to be able to go into very, very high percentage finishes utilizing either bottom knee or top knee to control his opponent's movement. With all that theory behind us, it's time for us to go into practical applications. I want to start looking now at the most common scenarios in which my athletes use Kimura in competition and in training. We're going to divide these into three main categories. The first are going to be top position, second, bottom position, and third will be standing position. These three categories, top position, bottom position, and standing position, you're going to find that there's many, many ways that we can use Kimura in these situations. We'll start off with top position very shortly. It's our job now to go through the very many everyday applications that you'll be expected to use Kimura in. I said earlier today that I prefer to see my students begin their study of Kimura in the side Kimura position. You're across your opponent's side and you lock up a Kimura. That was certainly true for understanding the mechanics of Kimura. It's a great way to start your study and make your first serious inroads into understanding the principles behind Kimura. And that's where I want to start applications also. Now, everything we've done so far has started with the assumption you actually had a Kimura, and then what to do once you have the lock. When we study applications, we have to get to a Kimura. Once you get a reputation as a guy who's got a dangerous Kimura, your opponents are going to be doing everything they can to prevent you from getting into Kimura situations. Let's start off with a general observation about Kimura. If I'm in a neutral situation, let's say for example Mateus is at an open guard, and is working from a seated open guard, and we're playing like so. This is a neutral position. Okay, there's good things Mateus can do from here, and there's good things I can do from here. It's pretty much neutral. Neither one of us controls the other. And so from a situation like this, Mateus would not be afraid to reach for my body. Okay, and he can do this in various kinds of ways because he feels safe because his legs are still a part in the equation. So in a situation like this, he feels safe enough to reach for my body, and that's going to create situations where I can go into Kimura attacks because we have a reaching arm, my head is higher than his elbow, and my elbow is higher than his, so I can easily go into Kimura in this situation. It was relatively easy because Mateus didn't feel threatened by the position. It's neutral. All that changes when you get into a dominant position, okay, like side control or mount or anything like this. When you get into a dominant position, your opponent realizes there's a real danger now, and so typically they bring everything in tight. Okay, so one of the biggest problems you face when you've gotten into a dominant position like side is how am I going to get into an opponent whose arms are in tight like so. Okay, it would be one thing if I was grappling with a neophyte whose arms were flopping around in the breeze and you could just grab a wrist and go straight to a Kimura. But at the level you guys operate at, everyone knows what a Kimura is. Everyone keeps their arms in close. Okay, so the problem we're facing now is we're in a side position, and Mateus has a position which I often refer to as a tombstone position. Okay, where my opponent's arms are in like he's in a tombstone, like so. And as a result, it's very, very hard for me to get in on my training partner's arms and secure a Kimura grip. First question we're going to ask: when people are in these defensive positions and their arms are in good, sound defensive positions, how am I going to get them into a Kimura hold? Well, there's three main methods, and if you're going to call yourself a master of Kimura, one day you've got to be good at all three. Okay, the first method are elbow penetration methods, where I take my hand and I penetrate underneath the elbow and I get my hand into this position. That will enable me immediately to lock up a Kimura. Okay, so any method where I go under the elbow and penetrate through the elbow is an elbow penetration method. Okay, that's one good way to do it. The other way I can do it is to start not at the elbow but at the wrist. Okay, and I've got two ways of doing that. I can use supinated grips where my hand is palm up like so, or I can use pronated grips where my hand is palm down. As a general rule, when Mateus's hand is above his chest, we use supinated grips. And when Mateus's hand is below his chest, we generally use pronated grips. When we first see someone by the wrist, I generally prefer to see you grip with the thumb. How you choose to finish is up to you. Some people prefer no thumb, some people prefer the thumb. We've seen earlier today that people's arms have been badly broken using both methods, so doesn't really make that much of a difference. Okay, but when you first go to control someone's wrist, it does make a difference. And so when we go to secure, we use the thumb to secure, whether it's pronated or whether it's supinated. Okay, now with that in mind, we've got to start somewhere. So let's start off with the idea of elbow penetration on an opponent who has his arms in a good, sound defensive position. First things first, if I'm going to use the elbow penetration method, I can't do it from a perpendicular side position. It's not going to work. I need to move to a north-south position. So here I am. I'm across my training partner's side, just like so. I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to go underneath my training partner's tricep, just like so. Okay. I get a hand on one side, an arm on the other. I bring my thumb underneath as far as it'll go. It may not be that far if my opponent's arms are in very tight. I'm going to use my hand on the floor to move around to a kind of a quasi north-south position, just like so. Okay, if we just turn a little bit this way. Now, I want to get my arm underneath his elbow, but he knows that, and he's keeping his arms in very, very tight. Okay, so I'm going to bring my hand up as far as it'll go. Your thumb will only go so far before his strong arm prevents any further movement. Okay, once we've gone as far as we can, we're going to put our hand across and we're going to bring our elbow forward. The further my elbow is back towards my opponent's shoulder, the less effective I will be at penetrating. Here, if he makes a strong defensive arm and I try to lift, it's just my biceps working against him. So what I want to do in these situations is bring my whole elbow forward. Then I start a drive towards the opposite hip, where my whole body goes forward and my legs get my opponent moving. Okay? What I'm trying to do is to take Mateus's elbow as high as possible. The lower his elbow down towards the floor, the harder it is for me to get underneath and penetrate through the elbow. So my whole thing from the north-south position is from here to bring my elbow forward, and then we start a drive across that raises his elbow. Once the elbow is raised, I change my wrist position. So I go here to palm up. From the palm up position, I take my legs and knees off the mat. And from this position, I physically push his wrist over my hand. Okay? I'm going to demonstrate on the other side so you can see the hand positions. The problem here is, how am I going to get my hand into this position, which I need? Okay? How am I going to get my pull hand through? So, as he has his arms in good sound defense position, I switch to north-south. From the north-south, my hand goes under, my elbow goes forward, and I start that drive across the body. Now, you can clearly see it's very, very hard for me to penetrate underneath. So I take the heel of my hand, and no matter how strong he makes his arms, I can always push the hand forward. As the hand goes forward, I now get space to bring my hand through. Once the hand is through, we're in the perfect position to lock the figure of four. As always, my middle finger controls the bend of the wrist on both my wrist and his. And now we're in the perfect position to come around the corner and cover the head and go into any one of the various sequences. If he locks his hands, for example, any one of the various sequences that we've seen earlier today. Okay? So, once again, getting underneath our opponent's arms, we start off in a side control position, just like so. From a side control, we block the near side, far side, and move around. From north-south, the wrist comes in, the elbow goes forward, and then we change the wrist position. From here, I take my knees off the mat, so we get a good compressive force. I push with the heel of my hand so that my hand can go inside. Once we're inside, we lock the figure of four. We block our training partner's head, and from here, any one of those various finishes that we saw earlier today can be employed successfully. We've seen this idea of elbow penetration methods of getting to the kimura from side position. Let's understand something very important about this method of attacking. As we saw in the previous sequence, my ability to get underneath and penetrate the elbow depends upon my opponent's elbow being elevated. If the elbow comes down towards the floor, it's very, very hard to go through underneath the elbow and get to a kimura grip. This can lead to some frustrating experiences that look like this. We'll match up with the camera like so. Okay, I get to a north-south position. That's pretty easy to do. We get underneath the elbow. That's pretty easy to do. We'll just straighten out our legs sometimes. And we're underneath to some degree like so. Okay? Your opponent recognizes the danger of a kimura. He makes his arm strong, and he recognizes that it's his left arm that I'm attacking. What I want to do is attack the left arm. Mateus recognizes this and turns to his left and pulls his elbow inside down to the floor. And that kills my ability to get underneath the arm and elevate the elbow. Remember, in order to get to my opponent's elbow and get to this position, I need his elbow high. Mateus recognizes this and just brings the elbow down. Okay? So I get to north-south, I get underneath, I try to lift, he turns left, and I lose the elbow. Okay, and that can be very, very frustrating. Now, as frustrating as that is, there's some good news. Understand something very simple. The more Mateus brings his left elbow down, the higher his right elbow will come. And the more Mateus defends his right elbow by bringing it down, the higher the left elbow will become. The real problem here is people have a tendency to develop tunnel vision. They say, I'm attacking the left arm, and they go in hell or high water driving for the left arm. He brings the elbow down to the floor, and you fail. He comes back to neutral. You try again on the left elbow. He brings left elbow to the floor, and you can see what the problem is. I'm just attacking one arm. Always understand that as Mateus takes away the left arm from me, and he turns and takes it away, he always offers me the opposite arm. Okay, so always remember the vital rule here. As one elbow goes down, the other must rise. I don't specify which elbow you go after. North, south, both of them are in front of you. All I specify is you go after the uppermost elbow. We never specify which one it is. He does. Okay? So I initiate an attack on the left arm, and he defends. As he defends, he will always give you the opposite arm to penetrate. And as a result, we're in the perfect position now to take advantage of that. Get the hand behind the back if possible. And then from here, we bring elbow to the floor and then step forward into a strong finishing position. Okay? If we keep in mind this valuable rule, that all we need to do is create one elevated elbow. It doesn't matter which one. And always remember, if your opponent depresses one elbow, he has to elevate the other. Don't get tunnel vision. Don't think there's only one arm that you're attacking. It's not. There's two right in front of you. Anytime you're north-south, always two elbows. As you see one go down, don't get frustrated. Just switch to the other elbow. And you'll have a lot of success penetrating at the elbow to get into your Kimura locks. We're looking at this idea of actually applying the knowledge that we've looked at so far in a concrete situation. The situation we're looking at is when we're across our opponent's side and we want to go into Kimura. We just looked at the idea of elbow penetration, which required us to switch to a north-south and then from there work underneath our training partner's elbows. Now, as good as these methods are, they have an obvious problem. That obvious problem is when we work from a north-south type situation, the space underneath your opponent's elbow is very small, but your wrist is pretty damn thick. So when we try to get underneath, your opponent can fight the elbows down to the mat, and it can be very tough. As he goes side to side, turning each elbow down, it's not easy to get inside from those north-south positions. Pretty soon the guy starts developing space, he throws his legs over, and you're back in guard. Okay? Let's contrast this with situations where instead of penetrating under the elbow with my forearm, that's a very thick part of my body to go through and underneath the elbow, we instead penetrate with the much thinner fingers underneath the wrist. Okay? As a general rule, it's much easier, put your arm down tight, it's much easier for me to take the thin cross-section of my fingers underneath and get to a wrist than it is for me to take the thick cross-section of a wrist underneath his elbow. Okay? So once again, my fingers are considerably thinner in cross-section than a wrist. And as a result, it's pretty easy to go underneath and get a good grip like so. Now the problem with this grip is that it's very easy for my opponent just to take his fist upwards and escape. Okay? So something's got to hold him down there, and that something is going to be your chest. So we're going to have an opponent start off in a good defensive structure like so. We're going to start off across our training partner's side, and this time we're going to have two arms over, just like so. From here, I'm going to take my right hand, and I'm going to take palm up. I'm going to break my arm back, and I'm going to punch through, and I'm going to grip my training partner's wrist, and I'm going to put his wrist under my chest. Now, when Mateus goes to yank his arm out, it's completely wedged inside. And as a result, it's very easy for me to draw him up and pull. And as a result, we can quickly get into that winning position that we saw earlier. Once we get the grip in place, we know what to do. If possible, we'll get the hand behind the back on first blush. If that should prove impossible, we could throw legs over, we could go into a bicep slice position, whatever you want. They're all highly effective, regardless of which type we use. Okay? So, once again, we've got an opponent with a very tight structure in here. It's hard to get underneath my training partner's elbows. So we start off with two arms over the top, just like so. And then from here, I take palm up grip and I fight through and I lock, grabbing a hold of my training partner's wrist. Now from here, I wedge it underneath my chest. So when Mateus goes to yank his arm free, it's quite frustrating, very difficult to achieve. Now I pull and I expose enough space underneath the elbow to get my hand into that winning position. And from here, we can apply all the various concepts that we looked at earlier today. From a situation like this, it won't be hard for us to start bringing a leg across our training partner's body, and from a situation like this, start getting strong breaks, regardless of the methodology you use. So this is a very effective way to get in, use that thin cross section to advantage, and get a hold of your opponent's arm in a way that facilitates entering Kimura from side. Now, let's start to look at pronated grips as a method to enter into Kimura from side. These are best done anytime my opponent's hand comes down below the line of his chest. As a general rule, when the hand is above the line of the chest, I favor supinated grips. But when his hand comes down the body below the chest, I generally favor pronated grips, palm down. Okay, so let's have a look at this. We've got an opponent in bottom side control, and we're interested in the idea of going in on someone who's got his arms in good sound defensive position. Okay, typically the main defensive positions we see are some people will ball up like so, other people will take underhooks on my body like so, and this too is a common position. Typically this arm will be here, and you'll find yourself in this kind of underhook situation. Okay, and we're expected to go into Kimuras from situations like this. Okay, first things first, if I have two arms on this side of the body, I've made it very easy for my opponent to use that underhook to start exposing my back and coming up towards me, so this is not a good thing. So from here, the first thing we want to do is make sure we're controlling down here by the hip and controlling at the elbow joint. Okay, look how Mateus's elbow is located here. The further my elbow is from Mateus's elbow, the more he can use that underhook to start moving my body around and causing problems for me. Okay, so my first thing when I come in here is I go elbow to elbow. Now when Mateus goes to use his underhook, it's considerably more difficult, and as a result, it's quite easy for me to punch back and take that palm down pronated grip on my training partner. From the pronated grip, I give a quick lift. Even if he has a strong resistant arm, it's quite possible for me just to lift over the wrist, just like so, and I feed my hand inside. Once we get the hand inside, we're in the perfect position now to start going on the attack. If my opponent is naive and leaves his hand out here, it's pretty easy for us to take the hand and put it in behind the back and go into our finishing sequences. If my opponent goes to lock his arms or tuck his hand inside his own thigh, then we can do the measures that we looked at earlier today. We can control our training partner, bring the hands through, lock over the back, elbow on the floor for example, and then from here go into a strong finishing position. Okay, but initially we need to get that arm, as he locks in his underhook, under control. So I take my elbow to his elbow, just like so. When he goes to move me around, it's surprisingly difficult. Now I take my arm back and I get my pronated grip. As my hand goes close to his elbow, just like so, we give a quick lift. Okay, I just need to be able to lift over my wrist. So I lift, flick, and the hand's in front. Once we get the Kimura grip, all those things that we've been looking at earlier today start to come into effect. We can bring the hand up, place it in behind, elbow down on the mat, etc., etc. If we feel we cannot separate our training partner's hands, so many options that we've looked at earlier today. I could, for example, throw my foot over and then from this cross Kimura position, go directly into my attacks, from the cross kimura, whatever you feel like, so to speak. So this represents a very effective way in which, when my opponent's hands come down below the line of his chest, we can use these pronated grips. There are sometimes, as you say, as Americans call them, freebies. Sometimes your opponent makes mistakes, and pronated grips can be very useful here too. So for example, if I come up into a knee on belly position with my training partner, sometimes you'll see an opponent post on a knee, and that gives you a very easy pronated grip entry into a kimura. Regardless, if my opponent's hand comes out of position and he's giving me free gifts like this, just grab the wrist and come over the top and take your kimura. But we're going to assume that your opponent has a good skill level. He won't make basic errors like this. So in these cases, it's typically because your opponent's taking an underhook. Okay, we know that when my opponent takes an underhook, the further my elbow from his elbow, the more effective that underhook becomes. Okay, so our first thing here is elbow to elbow position. Okay, now when he goes to use his underhook, it's surprisingly difficult. Now from here, I go back and I use that pronated grip to quickly feed my hand inside, and now we're back in business. From here, it's not a difficult thing for us to go into the various finishes that we've seen earlier today. We're looking at the idea of applying the various techniques and theories of kimura that we've been looking at earlier in the video. Now we're looking at applying these in practical situations. Let's switch our attention now to situations where you're in your opponent's half guard, you're playing top position, and you want to start employing kimura in constructive ways. Let's look at a situation where Mateus has my right leg well trapped. Okay, a few general rules in these situations. You will often hear people say that the man on bottom is well advised to start taking underhooks in positions like this. Okay, sometimes they'll take that underhook and remain down here with a shoulder on the mat. Sometimes they'll prop themselves up on an elbow, like so. We often refer to this as a power prop. Okay, it doesn't matter whether my opponent's up on an elbow or down on a shoulder. As long as we can access the top arm, we can be very, very successful in these situations utilizing kimura. Okay, now a word to the wise in these situations. My opponent's ability to use that underhook is proportional to the relative head position between myself and my opponent. If my head is over my opponent's head, he can easily use that underhook to start exposing my back and take me out of position. Okay, so I have to be very careful about his position of the underhook, and more importantly, the position of my head. As my head drifts north, his underhook takes more and more effect on my body and starts becoming more and more disruptive. So what I want to do is to shut down his underhook. And the single best way for me to do that is to take an elbow to elbow position. I'm going to take my left arm across over his left arm. And from here, I'm going to keep a good elbow to elbow position. As a result, when he goes to use his underhook, when I keep my head over his hips, it's very hard for him to hike me up with that underhook now. And as a result, it's relatively simple for us to access the wrist and from here start to utilize the kimura from half guard. The first version of kimura from half guard that we're going to look at has an interesting element to it. It's going to play the difference between kimura as a restraining mechanism and as a submission mechanism. I'm going to employ a one-handed kimura grip. I'm going to take my training partner's hand, and instead of locking the conventional figure 4 with 2 hands, I'm going to feed my opponent's hand through and take a one-handed kimura grip, where one hand goes through and holds my training partner's hand. Now, let's understand something very important. When I go to employ a one-handed kimura, I never grip the wrist. If my opponent simply straightens his arm now, he will easily get away from me. So when we take a one-handed kimura, the target of my grip is the blade of my training partner's hand. I take 4 fingers and lock them with no thumb around the blade of the hand. When Mateus goes to straighten his arm out now, it's extraordinarily difficult because you truly dominate the end of the lever. If I grab down the wrist, I'm not close to the end of the lever at all, and he can easily straighten out and away from me. So when we take our grip, we have a figure 4 grip. Look how I release and I lift my palm off his hand so that I can easily feed the one-handed kimura grip in. I put my hand on the floor and I hike his hand towards his armpit, bringing his elbow up to the vulnerable shoulder line. Now when my training partner goes to move out, it's a very difficult thing. I start now to take advantage of our leg positioning. I'm going to shoot my hips out. I'm going to place my hand, like so, on my training partner's near side knee. As he locks up tight on my legs, I'm going to scoop my hips out and bring my knee in as a wedge, just like so. It looks like a very unstable position, but you've got to have faith in this kimura that you're working with here. If you're long through the body, you can often get grips here on your training partner's legs, but if your opponent extends the leg away, that may not be possible, and then we just have to work here with this wedge in place. Now I'm going to post on my training partner's leg, and from here I'm going to extract my leg. If my opponent should try to explode up on top of me in this situation, I just put my arm underneath and I hold on to the kimura. As Mateus goes to explode up from bottom, his own kimura will make it very difficult. Even if I did not have control of his legs and he scissored his legs and came up to his base, it would be very difficult because of this one-handed kimura. It's a truly fine way to restrain his movement. Now I post my hand on the floor and switch my base back in towards my training partner. From here, we go right back into the original kimura that we worked with. I lock up, I go back into the figure of 4. As always from this situation, I crowd my training partner's shoulder line and look to step over the head. As we talked about earlier in the video, we go onto the diagonal line of power and we find ourselves in the perfect position to finish. As we get that strong elbow to elbow position, we use a pull dominant kimura and we're right there for a strong finish. So we're using kimura in 2 ways here. We use the one-handed kimura as a restraining mechanism so we can effectively get past our training partner's legs. Once we've gotten past the legs, we go back to the traditional figure 4 two-handed kimura, get onto the diagonal line of power, and we get a very strong arm break. Let's have a look at it from a slightly different angle. We start off here. Mateus has a good solid grip here on my leg, and he's a good man working from bottom and has that strong underhook. Initially here we're stable. We go across our training partner's body. I take that elbow to elbow position and I sit my hips through. If necessary, I'll hold at the legs and I keep my head over my training partner's hips. So when he goes to hike with that underhook, it's a difficult thing. You'll notice that my support leg is well bent and I'm on my toes. If my leg is straight and relaxed and my opponent bridges into me, that could have serious ramifications. So we always make sure we're in this good position with a cocked, strong leg behind us. As a result, it's not a difficult thing for us to access the wrist, and we come through and apply that initial kimura lock. Just looking once again at the one-handed kimura, we start off with a figure 4 grip. I just lift my wrist to expose his hand and I hit a pass off where my hand goes from over my wrist to under my wrist, and as a result we get that one-handed kimura grip. You'll notice the one-handed kimura, we grab the blade of the hand here. We don't hold the wrist where he can easily straighten his arm and escape. Once we get the blade of the hand, we hike the hand up so the elbow comes to the shoulder line. Now from here, I look at his legs. If the knees are up high towards me, I will often scoop underneath the legs. If he's extended the legs away, then from here we put post on the bottom knee and we bring our knee in just like so. And from here we post and slip out. From this position, my hand goes down to the hip or inside the leg. When my opponent goes to get up on top of me now, it's a very difficult thing. We can walk around the corner, we bring our elbow back, we perform that sit-through action, and we expose our training partner's wrist once again. There's the figure of 4, there's the step over our training partner's head, there's the movement towards the diagonal line of power, and there's the sweeping of my elbow to his elbow into a very strong finishing position. Now, earlier in this video, we spent a lot of time in the t-kimura position. The reason for this is simple. We saw that from any scramble, uncontrolled situation, if we can land in a t-kimura, you have an excellent ability to control your opponent's movement in ways where we can either use bottom knee finishes or top knee finishes and take what seem to be uncontrolled situations through to a submission hold. Let's look now at how we can climb over our opponent's half guard, land in a t-kimura, and then go from there to a win. So, once again, Mateus has an excellent grip on my leg. And for whatever reason, once again, I'm able to secure this initial kimura on my training partner. As we come forward with the kimura, we're going to get our opponent's hand down towards the floor. We're going to start coming up on our head just like so. As with any half guard situation, one of my biggest concerns is freeing the knee of my trapped leg. As long as Mateus controls my leg above the knee, he's in control of my leg overall. So whenever I'm working from half guard, one of our biggest concerns is to free the knee of the trapped leg. Anytime I free my knee, he has considerably less control over my leg. When the lock of his legs is beneath my knee, he has very little control over the movements of my leg. Okay, so right now he's in the driver's seat. He's done a good job of controlling my leg above the knee. We're going to do something about that. As we initially go in on our training partner, we're going to post on our head here, and we're going to come up into a tripod position. I'm going to take my second leg and put my foot in here as a wedge, and as a result, I can start to free the knee of the trapped leg. Once I feel that knee has come free, my knee comes across my training partner's hip and wedges on the hip. And as a result, I can start coming out and onto a free leg. The problem is that I'm inherently unstable in these situations. You can clearly see this is not a position of stability, but it doesn't matter because I have the kimura locked. So from here, when I go across my training partner's body, we end up now in a t-kimura. Once again, just reaffirming the basics of a t-kimura. If Mateus tries to turn away from me, that's not going to work because I have the kimura to hold him in place. If Mateus doesn't react and just stands still, doesn't move, that's not going to work because now I can easily just sit up and come into a pin across my opponent's side with a trapped arm. So his only real option here is to turn up into us. We've seen earlier today that if my opponent comes up early, my strategy one is to come in with the bottom knee. The second strategy we can employ is to throw our leg over as a crossface and put his two shoulders on the floor. From a situation like this, not difficult for us now to come up to our knees, put our knee around our training partner's hands, and from here we come up into a cross kimura. From the cross kimura position, we just close and finish with using our legs as a way to amplify the power of the kimura. Let's have a look at this general attack again. From a situation where we're down here in half guard, Mateus does a good job of coming in with his underhook and controlling me like so. We've seen the single best way for us to control the underhook is to get over the shoulder. The more my chin drifts up to the shoulder, the more effective Mateus becomes with that underhook. So my first thing here is to put my chin over his elbow. When he goes to lift me, it's much more difficult now. And as a result, we can sweep across and get elbow to elbow on our training partner. Okay? Always remember, the beginning of negation of my opponent's underhook is my head position, through my chin. Once my chin comes over my training partner's elbow, when he goes to hike the elbow up, it's so difficult. Now I come across, elbow to elbow, and we get that initial kimura lock. Okay? Off the initial kimura, we come down posting on the head. I come up into a high tripod, I fit my foot inside my training partner's knee, and we use that now to free the knee of the trapped leg. Once the foot comes through, now it becomes possible for us to roll across our training partner's body. As he goes to turn up into us, we play the usual game, keeping his elbow elevated. As a result, I can return him to the mat. Even if Mateus got all the way up to his knees, we would still, even under these circumstances, be able to lever him back down and return him to his base. As a result, we can shoot our leg over the top. We come up into a tripod once again. I put my knee over my training partner's hand so that as we come out the back door, it's quite possible for us now to lock up a very tight cross kimura position. And from here, the elbow comes up to the shoulder line and we get that strong finish that we're looking for. We've been looking at the idea of working inside a half guard and going directly into kimura attacks. From half guard, many will be the time your opponent will like to work with an underhook here, and there's a good reason for this, because if my chin comes up to my training partner's shoulder and he starts hiking that underhook, he can start getting back exposure. If I start locking in here, Mateus can easily scoop inside and start rolling me across. There's all kinds of good things he can do when he starts hiking that arm up. So it's very important we understand first how to negate the power and effectiveness of that underhook. It always comes down ultimately to head position manifested through the chin. If my chin is over Mateus's shoulder and he hikes the underhook, that will immediately destabilize me and get me to a head over head position. Okay, I don't want to be head over head here, I want to be head over hips. So I'm going to take my chin down here to his elbow. When he goes to hike up the arm now, it's significantly more difficult. It becomes even more difficult when I come across and get good elbow position on my training partner and sit through like so. Now his underhook is almost useless, my head is over the hips, and we're in a good position now to start utilizing his underhook against him. Okay? Reflections like this will often inspire the man on bottom to go to a different kind of underhook position. Instead of staying down on his shoulder, Mateus is going to come up here on his elbow, and this really complicates things. Okay, from here I feel very unstable, and my opponent can come up from bottom with single leg attacks. He can scoop inside my leg. There's a huge number of things he can do in this position. Okay, it's very, very difficult and risky for me now to start going towards a kimura. I've exposed my back to my opponent. There's all kinds of madness that can occur in situations like this. This is not the time for me to be attacking his underhook arm. Instead, I want to focus my kimura attacks on this, the propping arm. Okay, now from here, I can't do anything in terms of attacking that propping arm until I free the knee of my trapped leg. So I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to post it here on my training partner's hip, just like so. And I'm going to bring my knee up. It's pretty easy for me to do this. All I do is I just turn my knee towards his opposite hip and I come up into this position here. So that now my leg is out, almost like a knee on belly type position. I'm going to seize my training partner here at the wrist. I'm going to bring my armpit over my training partner's head. If his head is up, I cannot hit the move we're about to do. So I'm going to use my head to move his head down and put my armpit over the head. Then in one motion, I snake my hand through, and I just have the confidence to roll my body across his body. You have the kimura in place. The only thing that remains is for me to point my toes and scoop my hips so that I can take my foot here to my training partner's leg and push out. From here, I find myself now right away into the t-kimura position. As my opponent tries to turn up and into me, it becomes again a situation where I can easily control my training partner's body direction. This time we're going to use a bottom knee finish. He comes up, we take our bottom knee inside underneath. From here, I hook my foot over my training partner's shoulder and we turn our opponent over. As we fall onto our side, we take our training partner's knuckles in towards our shoulder. We're in the perfect position now to lock an initial figure of four, hand assisted, and then from this position, strangle for the finish. Let's have a look at that sequence again. We have a talented opponent on bottom who's doing a good job of propping up on the elbow and getting into a position where he can sweep, come up with single legs, etc., etc. So from the half guard situation, he's got an excellent bite on my leg and he's down here propped up on one elbow. Okay. From this general situation, we get a hold of our training partner's wrist. We use our head to move his head down, and I post so that my knee comes up, and you'll see my knee is now free. Okay. Once the knee is free, I go over the top of the head and I snake my hand through, and I hit a simple forward roll motion that takes me past my opponent's body here. I like to slide my hips up to my training partner's shoulder line, and as a result, now I can put my foot on my training partner's knee and start that action of kicking out. If my opponent tries to get up, we always manipulate them at the elbow. As he fights to get up, we go in with the bottom knee. Once that bottom knee comes in, we take our foot over our training partner's shoulder and turn their body over. That gives us the perfect position to control our training partner's knuckles into the chest. We bring our legs up high, locking an initial figure of four, hand assisting it if necessary, and then from here, a strangle for the finish. In this way, we can take what is the apparent strength of our opponent's half guard position, that power prop, lock a kimura on it, and use it to go directly into our attacks. Let's take a trip down to the basement and look at some of these kimura concepts that we've been focusing on in the video in a live classroom setting. Here I am working with Nikki Ryan, and we're going over this concept of using our legs to set up kimuras in a very special way. We're playing here with the idea of the seated kimura, a seated head and arm kimura, where instead of just controlling our opponent's arm, as we would in a conventional kimura, we're controlling the head too. This is one of the greatest ways for us to access our opponent's back. Now, the attack we're using from the back is Ushiro Senkaku, the triangle from the back. And this gives us many opportunities to go into various forms of triangle. And of course, we know that once we have a triangle, it's an easy thing to go into kimura. So I'm coaching Nicky Ryan in this concept. You'll notice he starts off, in this case it's Ethan Crownston now, switching off. He's failed here with the kimura. He can't get the hand behind the back, so he traps the head and the arm together. So now it's a kimura plus the head. As a result, he can take a seated position where his feet become unweighted. He can separate his opponent's hands with his legs and utilize the strength of his legs through a triangle, in this case Ushiro Senkaku, to lock up his opponent, and then ultimately go back to a kimura for the finish. And of course, you can do this in different ways. You can lock the triangle from the front, from the back. Here we're looking at the Hantai Senkaku, the wrong way triangle, and this is one of Ethan's strongest moves, and he used this famously in competition to enact a legendarily powerful break in ADCC competition. Let's continue down in the basement now with this notion of the head and arm kimura. Here I am demonstrating to the class the key notions behind this head and arm kimura. You can see what's happening here. I'm attempting a conventional kimura and I'm getting stymied by my opponent's resistance. I can't separate the hands. So I move around to the back and lock up the head and arm kimura. That's just a kimura that includes our opponent's head. From here, I'll take a seated position. From the seated position, the first leg passes across my training partner's hips and goes through to the far side. This enables me to access the second leg, and now from here I have two unweighted feet. This allows me to use the strength of my legs to separate my opponent's hands and put a foot inside my opponent's armpit. That's going to make it very easy for me now to transfer into Ushiro Senkaku, the triangle from the back. Once we lock up that position, now we can take advantage of the fact that the triangle greatly facilitates any kimura attack. Here I'm attacking the kimura directly out of the Ushiro Senkaku, and you can see it puts severe braking pressure on Nicky Ryan. Because he can't move his head, it's very, very difficult for him to prevent a strong break in action on the shoulder and elbow. This is one of my favorite positions to attack kimura out of. Often it's difficult for your opponent to see coming. No one really expects a kimura from that unconventional position like this. Here we're dealing with the problem. You can't separate your opponent's hands. No problem. We shift around to the back. We lock up the head as well as the kimura, and then take the seated position. The seated position makes it so easy to pass legs across our opponent's body and create the two unweighted feet. And now we can wrestle our opponent's hands with our legs. And as a result, we get the foot into the armpit and set up that Ushiro Senkaku, the triangle from the back. It's an incredibly strong and controlling grip. And as a result, we can now apply a kimura. Because our opponent can't move his head to extricate himself, the kimura comes on very, very quickly and very effectively. This is absolutely one of my favorite ways to work for another reason also. If my opponent should manage to turn inside my Ushiro Senkaku, he comes right up into a front triangle. We just go from one triangle to the other. Here I've made the switch to the Hantai Senkaku, a triangle with my legs locked in what seems to be the wrong way. You'll notice that the triangle is locked in front of Nicky Ryan's far shoulder, and as a result, we get very good control of the head and the arm, and as a result, we can enact a very strong kimura attack from bottom position. Once again, because Nicky Ryan's head can't move, it's locked up in a triangle, defense to the kimura becomes exceptionally difficult. This is one of the great themes of this video. So here's the starting position. My opponent has his hands securely locked. It's very hard to get the hand behind the back, so we switch around behind, lock up head and arm together, and take a seated position. It's the seated position that makes it so easy to pass the legs across and then use our feet to separate his hands. Then we make a quick transition into Ushiro Senkaku, the rear triangle. Our first attack from here, straight to kimura, hand on the outside of the thigh. That's a very strong breaking position. If for whatever reason our opponent were able to turn into us, we would simply switch our legs and go to a different form of triangle. The one we happen to be looking at is the idea of Hantai Senkaku, the triangle locked the wrong way. Here we have no intention of strangling our opponent. Kimura as our intention. So we lock our feet in front of our training partner's far shoulder, and then from here we bend the arm in the usual fashion And because my opponent's head is so securely trapped, it's very, very difficult for him to extricate himself. Back in the basement now, doing some training with 2 students working on a one-handed kimura variation. Very often we'll use one-handed kimura when our opponent denies us the use of the power line. Here you can see Nicky Ryan doing a great job of getting to the power line with a fairly conventional kimura. You see how the head moves away in an arc, and as a result is getting tremendous pressure. I'm emphasizing here the elbow to elbow contact, which maximizes the use of lever and fulcrum. You see Nicky Ryan's head moving away, driving with the legs, and as a result he's getting a very, very strong kimura indeed. So we're emphasizing here the basic elements, the power line. Now our opponent switched his arm position, and that's going to prevent Nicky Ryan from getting to the power line. You'll see his opponent's right arm hugs the hips, so Nicky Ryan immediately makes a switch to a one-handed kimura. Notice how he grips down on the blade of his opponent's hand, not the wrist. His opponent's trying to block with the right arm, but Nicky Ryan ignores this, rotating around, takes a high tripod position, and then a rotation of his entire body with the head turning into the hips, blocking his opponent's hip with his right hand, creates a very, very strong one-handed kimura effect. Here's Ethan Kralenston doing the same work. From a situation where he's unable to hit the conventional kimura, here he is working with his elbow and a nice wedge. This is a very conventional kimura here. He's got to do a better job of stepping his body across. There's the big confident step that flattens his opponent to the correct degree. His elbow is a wedge down by the hip. He goes elbow to elbow to maximize the use of lever and fulcrum, and the head begins to move away. As the head moves away, we get that strong pulling action, and there's a good conventional finish. This time, as he goes to work, his opponent blocks the hips. That's going to make the previous conventional kimura method a difficult one to employ. This is exactly the time we'll switch off to a one-handed kimura. He uses the right hand to block the hips, left hand controls the blade of the hand, goes into a high tripod position, and then from here rotates to get a strong finish one-handed. This is a very useful way of finishing anytime we feel we can't get a satisfactory position on our opponent's power line. Here you'll see I take the one-handed grip. The opponent uses the right arm to block, and from here I block his hips in return, and then as I tripod, I come into a rotational finish where my head moves almost across my opponent's stomach and my legs walk around the head, creating tremendous braking pressure.